Another way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this in the Quran is by using the word Inna Allah yuhib. Inna Allah yuhibbul muhsinin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the Muslim. Inna Allah yuhibbul muttaqin. Etc. etc. So this is the first circle. This is the core. This is the principles of our religion. So the thing with these, the first circle, the principle is that this is an abstract concept. How do you, for example, get more taqwa? How do you increase your tawakkul? How do you be a person of more remembrance? How do you do all this? Can you take a UFA 2-credit course, by the end of which you will have more tawakkul, and your tawakkul have increased? Or can you do something, can you buy it on 9, where then you will have more taqwa, for example? This is where the second circle comes in. So the second circle consists of these fundamental obligations and fundamental prohibitions, which we are supposed to do. And that is the second circle. And if you take our fundamental obligations, for example, salah, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Allah says, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, establish prayer so that you can remember me. Is remembrance a fundamental principle from core circle 1? Yes, it is. But how do you bring that remembrance into your life? Allah gives a practical solution for that. And that practical solution is salah. For example, Allah says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. It prescribed on us fasting just like it prescribed fasting on people before us. Why? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. So that we will have taqwa. Can you tell me a practical example? Something that I can do which will bring taqwa into my life, after which I will be more God-fearing, more God-conscious? So that is fasting. So everything in the Quran, all the fundamental obligation and all the fundamental prohibitions, they are tied. They are tied to the principle. They are tied to the principle. Now, one common mistake that people can often do is that they can separate the principles from the rituals. They can separate the fundamental obligations from the principles. And that is not the purpose of these principles. It is not this fasting that is going to be made successful. It is the taqwa that you get from the fasting that will make you successful. It is not the salah itself that will lead you to success. It is the principle behind the salah that will lead you to success. Quran doesn't do that. Every time the Quran talks about fundamental obligations and fundamental prohibitions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ties it. The Quran ties it to the principles. And it is not just for the obligations, it's also for the prohibitions. Inna salata yanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Indeed, the salah, the prayer, it stops you from fahsha'i wal munkar. You know? So if somebody is doing those things, then obviously the shamelessness will kind of make them do or push them towards bad things. And what that shamelessness does, it gets rid of your gratitude. It gets rid of your taqwa. So again, it is tied to the principle. Up to this point, there is no disagreement among the scholars. There is no disagreement among the scholars of Islam what are the principles and the basic and the fundamental obligations and the prohibitions. Now, after this comes the third circle. The third circle, the first circle is the core principle. Second circle is the fundamental obligation and fundamental prohibition. The third circle is of what I call lesser. These may be the sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ, or they may be the things in the Quran Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned. For example, lower your voice, walk with humility, or the sunnah of Prophet ﷺ, for example, when you enter the masjid, enter with your right foot. When you are going on a journey, you should say a dua, etc., etc. These are all lesser recommendations. These are not at the same level as the fundamental obligation. They're nice things. As a human being, our priority has to be that we try to incorporate principles in our lives. We have to look at the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to have in our lives. How do you do that? You achieve that by following the fundamental obligations and the fundamental prohibitions. And once you have done that, once you have no gaping holes in your life where you're violating any of those principles, then you should look at these lesser recommendations. And these are going to beautify your life. These are going to make your life even better. It's not haram to enter a masjid with the left foot front. It's not haram when you go on a journey and you don't make a dua. But these are something that are good, that will enhance your life. So when the prophets would give dawah, when our beloved prophet gave dawah, when all the other prophets gave dawah, how would they do that? They would give by starting with circle 1 and circle 2. Fundamental principles, fundamental obligation and fundamental prohibitions. And when people will accept it wholeheartedly, only after that when they would be in their inner circle, they will teach them further tarbiyah, further education about the third circle. Now, some people, what they can easily make this mistake, especially if they're very serious about the religion, is that they can take the lesser recommendation, they can mix them up, and since they are so excited, they want to follow everything in the religion, they will say everything is compulsory. We must do everything. So, for example, such a person, when they see a brother or sister leaving the Jummah prayer, not praying the Sunnah, for example, they will go to them, hey, why don't you pray Sunnah? You have to pray Sunnah. Why don't you pray Sunnah? So that's something that can happen if people mix these lesser recommendations with the fundamental obligations that people do. For example, Salah is fundamental. You have to do that. Doing dua after Salah, zikr after Salah, this is not fundamental. This is a lesser recommendation. So what's the problem with that? So what happens if people actually kind of mix and matches these things and just kind of makes everything compulsory? But there's a big problem with that. I will give you an example of a house. So these lesser recommendations are like decorations in your house. You know, so you have a beautiful painting, you have a beautiful rug, you have a very comfortable sofa. That's the example of these lesser recommendations. And when you have a house, you need a wall, you need a door, you need a ceiling. Without these things, you cannot live in the house. This house will be uninhabitable. But if somebody doesn't have a carpet, you can't go to them and say to them, hey, you don't have a house because you don't have a carpet. Having a sofa is a very relaxing thing, very comfortable thing in the house, but you can't go to people, hey, you don't have a house because you don't have a sofa in your house. And so when we mix these fundamental obligations and these lesser recommendations, these nice things to do, when we mix them up, the listener, the young person, the young girl, the young boy, they can never differentiate between these. They're unable to differentiate between these. I'll give you another example. So, for some people, everything is haram. Taking pictures is haram. Spending time on Facebook is haram. Watching movies is haram. Watching playing video games is haram. Everything is haram for some people. But then there are some things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the second circle said adultery is haram. Doing drugs, for example, alcohol is haram. This is a major sin. So what we're doing when we're saying video games is haram, we are Allah says it's haram, and we don't like it at the same level. And that's not acceptable because this removes people, this hardens them and it turns people away from the religion. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So this young boy or young girl who, when they're told, hey, video games is haram, they're thinking, well, video games is haram, but I play them all the time. Movies is haram, I watch movies all the time, not just one, I just keep binge watching one after another. You know? They are haram, and one thing is haram, and alcohol is haram. Well, since I'm doing all those things, why not do these things as well? Some people may give an argument. They will say, well, the more things you list as haram, the more you're protecting people. The more people will not then indulge in those activities. But that's not true. Brother and sister, the people who cared the most about humanity, the people who cared the most about their community were the prophets. We cannot enhance their work. They were the best. They were the best amongst all of us. And when they were to protect people, when they were to preach to people, How would they do that? They would tell them about the fundamental principles. They will start there, and then they will tell them about the fundamental obligation and the fundamental prohibitions. So this is the three circles. The first circle is the core principle, then you have the fundamental obligations, fundamental prohibitions, then you have these lesser recommendations. And then there's the fourth circle. Fourth circle consists of these, what we call Ijma al-Sahaba. Now there is no such thing as Ijma al-Sahaba on a point of view. What that means is that there is an Ijma on an event, for example. People who attended the Battle of Badr, they said, well, it happens on this day. This many people weren't there. We camped in this particular location. So this is actually them agreeing on those details. Now there are three kinds of that ijma. One would be, for example, on the event, as we talked about. The second would be ijma in fuqaha sahaba. These Sahaba only met Prophet only once or twice. They had very little knowledge of Quran at that time. So, but then there were Sahaba such as Ibn Abbas who were champions, who were scholars of Islam at that point in time because of the knowledge that they had. So when many of them would reach at the conclusion that that would be Ijma min al-Fuqaha Sahaba. And then in the time of the Caliphate, when Prophet or when Abu Bakr needed some kind of decision to be made, he wouldn't ask everybody, all the Sahabas. He would make a committee, and whoever was included in that committee, they will make those decisions to run the business. So that will be Ijma min al-Umara Sahaba. This is the fourth circle. And so when we think about the religion, we have to think about the first three circles. We have to think about the fundamental principles. We have to think about the obligations and the prohibitions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. This is our religion, and then the lesser recommendation. Everything outside the fourth circle, for example, it's a research issue. It's a research issue. And another research issue is the circle 5, where people could not find direct answers to their practical problems in life from, let's say, Quran, from, let's say, the Hadith, from, let's say, the Sunnah. It may be because they didn't ponder upon those things long enough. So they have to do research on these research. They have to do further research, and then based on their knowledge, they reach a point of view. And we call it fatwa. We call that thing a fatwa. Now, this person who reaches this fatwa, they understand that, well, the absolute religion lies in circle 1, 2, and 3. And then after that, I couldn't find clear answers, so I made this ijtihad. But this ijtihad, I am satisfied on. I have to follow it. It's not compulsory on any other person to follow my ijtihad. Because Allah has created many knowledgeable human beings, and somebody may look at it from a different perspective, and maybe they will be reaching at a different conclusion. But I'm not going to tell people, this is Islam. If you're going to enter Islam, you're going to enter Islam from this fifth circle or fourth circle. That's not how it has to be. We have to keep it where prophets or the other prophets, how they invited people towards Islam. At the end of the day, an ijtihad is nothing but your best analysis or my best analysis. I could be wrong when I reach that ijtihad, or I could be right. Either way, I'm not going to hold on to that fatwa just by violating a principle. What is the principle? The principle is all the Muslims are brothers. And what is the other principle? They give preference to others, even though they themselves need that. So the love is the principle. Loving each other and having honor, respecting your brother's honor, your brother's property, and your brother's is the principle. And they would not violate that to hold on to their own fatwa. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us very good understanding, and our children a very good understanding of fundamentals of Islam. So what happens when you lose sight of these principles? What happens when you don't look at the main picture, when you don't look at the big picture and try to incorporate these principles in your life, by following the fundamental obligations first, by not doing the fundamental obligations first. When you don't do that, and when you try to take one small thing from the outset from Islam, and you try to say, well, this is where Islam starts from. If you don't believe this, then you're not amongst us. This is a detrimental concept. And it kind of puts the whole picture upside down. So for example, Hajj is fundamental obligation, isn't it? And it's something that encompasses all the principles, all the good principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to have inside us. Remembrance, taqwa, tawakkul, justice, honesty. All of these things we are supposed to incorporate in our characteristics based on this wonderful worship and ritual that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made compulsory for whoever can. But then, for example, you see in Hajj, there are people who want to touch the black stone. And there's a lot of people, and you can't do that. So then they're jumping on top of another. And then one brother or one sister is willing to elbow you so that they can touch the black stone. Or another person is willing to throw the grandma across the block just so that they can accomplish that mission. Or somebody is willing to do other things just so that they can reach Hajj Rasul. The moment this person reaches Hajj Rasul, what they should be doing, they should be asking forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, what have I done? This happens when we lose the sight of the principle, when we don't understand why is a ritual, why is a fundamental that Allah wants us to do, why is it prescribed, why does He want us to do it? Another example from Hajj is Muzdalifah, a sacred land where you're supposed to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you wake up in the morning, and it's like you woke up in a landfill. There are vipers, there are other things everywhere, vipers, ants. And you're like, what happened here? This is what happens when you lose sight of the principles that Allah has given us. And this is what Bani Israel did. Bani Israel were given a beautiful religion which was based on principles. But then they lost sight of the principles. And when they lost sight of the principles, all they were left with these rituals. And they made their religion ugly. They made their religion ugly. A beautiful religion of Allah had given them. They lost sight of it. I want you guys to remember this concept in your daily life because I want you to think of the Muslim Ummah as a united Ummah. What unites us is the circle 1, 2, and 3. The principles, the fundamental obligations, the fundamental prohibitions, and the lesser recommendations. This is what unites us unanimously across the board. But when we lose sight of this, when we don't focus on what unites us, all we can see in our lives is what divides us. So focus on what unites us. When you focus on something that unites you, you'll automatically have a good attitude. You'll automatically have a loving attitude towards your brother. This is how the Muslim mind works. This is how my mind works. Growing up, you heard of a few things. Somebody told you a good story about Islam, about the prophets. Somebody told you if you were to do this good deed, you would get this many hasanat. If you were to do this, if you were to stay away from this, you will get this much ajr. All of these things you're told. Somebody tells you a good thing about a saint or some good personality, and you think in your mind, accumulation of all of this is Islam. You think all of this is Islam. This mixed ground salad of all this information is Islam. But is that true? Shouldn't we be separating what is the word of Allah? Shouldn't we be separating what comes from the Sunnah of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and keeping everything else in its place, keeping everything else in its place, and noticing that if there is a disagreement on ijma issues or jihad issues or other things, that does not mean we are a divided community. We are a very community which is bonded by very, very powerful core, very, very powerful core principles, obligations, prohibitions, and recommendations. So I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we all get loving feelings towards our community. We all have a positive attitude towards everybody in the universe when we think about other people. And that whenever we think about our brothers and sisters We have nothing but respect for them and honor for them in our life. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فليحسن
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين والتين والزيتون وطور سينين وهذا البلد الأمين لقد خلقنا الإنسان في أحسن تقويم ثم رددناه أسفل سافلين إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات فلهم أجر غير ممنون فما يكذبك بعد بالدين فليس الله بأحكم الحاكمين الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله الله أكبر الله الله أكبر الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله.
Assalamu alaikum.
عليكم السلام.
Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. First, thanks to Dr. Weiss for giving the khutbah. Sheikh Wadak, taking care of his wife, who had a surgery on Tuesday. Alhamdulillah, she's recovering well. Make special dua for her recovery, speedy recovery, inshallah. And I wanted to remind you all, please, there are a couple of things here. First, if you come for Jummah, make sure you enroll and try to come a little earlier so everybody is in by 1 o'clock. That makes it easier for the check-in point and really benefits everybody. So because we're trying to really control, manage the time, so it's better if you just came in at least 10 minutes early and take care of everybody before 1 o'clock, so everybody's seated when the khutbah starts, and that makes it for the check-in for the personnel. Second, we did make a change. Before we used to say that the orange spot is here as the foot side, that's on your back side. Now we have reversed that into the time to create one more space on the front here. So the orange spot is going to be at your feet. Going forward, every time you put your the rug down, it's going to be your feet are going to be on that orange spot. So that will make it easy for everybody, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, please donate generously on the way out. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, there is a watch that I found here on the table. Anybody is missing one? It is possible. If you know somebody who's wearing it, they might be here today. I'll leave it in the office.